and welcome to another edition of The Leading Question. I'm Steve Wigreiser. Today we're going to talk about a very important court in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, the Magisterial District Court. Now, this court is important for a number of reasons. First, it is the first level court in our unified judicial system in the Commonwealth. So you can think of it as a place where justice begins for many individuals who have contact with our justice system. Secondly, it is the court that most of us will have contact with throughout our lifetime for a number of reasons that we're going to talk about during this segment. And finally, the court represents a unique opportunity for citizens to have all manner of controversies and disputes and claims resolved fairly and impartially by a judge, efficiently, in a speedy fashion, and in many cases you don't even need to hire a lawyer. To talk to us about the court today, I'm very pleased to have a very experienced judge from this court, Judge Henry J. Schireson. Judge Schireson has served the citizens of Montgomery County for the past 32 years as a judge. He has an interesting background and an interesting perspective on the court. And Judge Schireson, I welcome you to the show.
Thank you, Steve. It's a pleasure to be here.
So, as my viewers know, I'd like to allow them to get to know our elected officials separate and apart from their official capacity. So to do that, could you tell us a little bit about your background, please?
I'll be happy to. I'll start at the beginning. I'm a Lower Merion guy. I was born in Lower Merion Township. I am a graduate of Lower Merion Public Schools. I attended Penn School and Ardmore Junior High and Lower Merion High School. I have lived in Wynwood, Gladwin, Merion, and now in Villanova. I have worked many different jobs before I became a judge in Lower Merion Township, including Narberth Animal Hospital, the General Wayne Inn. I delivered flowers for Albrecht Flowers in high school, and I also parked cars, as I say, at the General Wayne Inn, and actually met my wife working at the Hot Shop Junior in Bryn Mawr way back in the 60s. And
that really goes back in time.
That goes back in time. And I'm happy to say I've been married to that wonderful woman for 44 years. We have 3 great children. And so Lower Merion is in my blood. I attended Penn State University, the only time I really was away from Lower Merion. And came back, worked as a high school teacher for a year. I taught at John Bartram High School, taught high school English. Was a local newspaper reporter and actually covered courts like mine for the Mainline Chronicle, a now defunct local newspaper. Attended law school at Temple Beasley School of Law, and launched my legal career.
All right, let's talk about that for a moment. What did you do in the law before you became a judge?
Well, before I became a judge, I worked as an intern at the United States Justice Department while I was in law school. I worked for a large law firm during the summer one of those years, and upon graduation I clerked for a trial judge in Montgomery County. I was his law clerk. I then got my dream job to be a prosecutor, an assistant district attorney in Montgomery County, where I worked for several years, worked my way up to the trials division, formed one of the first specialty prosecution units in the DA's office, the sex crimes unit, and tried many very high-profile and distressing cases involving crimes against women and children. I tried murder cases, and I really enjoyed being a prosecutor. After that, I took a job as a corporate lawyer with what was then called ARA Services, now Aramark, a wonderful corporation headquartered in Philadelphia. At the time had 125,000 employees, and I was a supervisor of litigation for that Corporation, and while there had a great opportunity to handle a case in 1982 at the World Court, where we had a claim against the Iranian government after the seizure of the hostages, and all the cases that were in the federal courts. It was a commercial claim. Were divested by virtue of the treaty that released the hostages. All claims in the federal courts of the United States had to be heard at the World Court. And in 1982, I received a summons to appear at the Peace Palace in The Hague and to present our claim. And it was a wonderful high point of my legal career. And as a 30-year-old lawyer, it was pretty special. After ARA, a good friend of mine who was a state representative told me that the local judge was retiring in Lower Merion. And it occurred to me that this was a wonderful way to get back into my community. I'd been working in the city of Philadelphia on Independence Mall, which is a wonderful place to work, but I like being closer to home. And I love the idea of serving the community in public service. Once you have that in your blood, and I had it as a result of being a prosecutor, I thought there was really nothing that would surpass that. And I had the opportunity to be appointed. I was appointed by the then governor, Richard Thornburgh, before he was Attorney General of the U.S. I was confirmed by the Senate, and I ran the next year for the first of 6 terms. I've been elected to 6 six-year terms since that time. I never imagined that I would be around that long.
And my understanding is that the last election, which just occurred last year, was an uncontested election. Is that true?
And that was very gratifying, that both the Democrats and the Republicans wanted me, apparently, and it's the way it should be with judges. There's not a partisan aspect to this job. And I've tried to stay out of politics, as I must, for the past 32 years.
Well, I think that speaks volumes as to who you are, both as a person and a judge. That is very impressive. So we're here today to talk about your court, a court that you know perhaps better than any other judge in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, simply by your longevity. So let's acquaint our viewers. What is the Magisterial District Court, and what do you do?
Well, one way to characterize the court is to say that the Magisterial District Court is the front line of the judicial system. We are at the base of the judicial pyramid. There are about 540 magisterial courts in Pennsylvania. Just to give you the structure of the court system, above those courts would be the trial courts, the common pleas courts in each county, of which there are probably 350 or more of those judges. And I could be a little off on that, but that's about it.
Okay.
Above that, you've got intermediate appellate courts, the Superior Court of Pennsylvania and the Commonwealth Court. And at the very top of that pyramid, the 7 justices of the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. At our court, we have a very wide jurisdiction, though a limited one at the same time. Every criminal case in Pennsylvania begins at our level. Whether it is a murder case, all the way down to the quasi-criminal, such as traffic cases, happen at our level. The lesser crimes, the summary offenses and traffic cases, we have trial jurisdiction. We actually make pronouncements of guilty or not guilty. In the more serious criminal cases, misdemeanors and felonies, we conduct preliminary hearings, which, by the way, are sometimes the only hearing that people have, because many criminal cases are resolved by plea bargaining at the next level, and there are no trials, there are no evidentiary hearings. So that's a very important part of our jurisdiction. We also issue process in criminal cases, such as arrest warrants, search warrants. We generally do not get involved in juvenile court matters. Those cases are petitioned directly to the juvenile court, which is an arm of the common pleas court. We have civil jurisdiction in landlord-tenant cases, people who are being evicted, often for non-payment of rent or violation of a lease. Lawsuits for money, civil cases, whether it be a contract action, a personal injury case, Any sort of civil claim.
Subject to a jurisdictional limit.
Subject to a jurisdictional limit. When I started, it was $4,000. It is now $12,000.
All right, so let me just rehash for a moment to make sure we understand. So your court has jurisdiction over criminal matters, which range from parking tickets and moving violations all the way up to the initial phases of homicide trials and other serious felony trials.
That is correct.
Okay, and then the other side is the civil side. So those are things like breach of contract, damages for personal injury, I assume landlord-tenant matters,
yes,
things like that. And your court has jurisdiction of all of those things.
All of those things and some extraordinary matters as well. Emergency protection from abuse. Spousal abuse cases where the common pleas court is unavailable after hours and on weekends. We will issue emergency orders restraining people from evicting them from their homes, sometimes restraining their conduct until the common pleas court can act.
Well, it sounds like you have an incredibly broad jurisdiction. Your court must be very, very busy. Can you give us some sense for the number of cases that are filed in your court each year?
I would say we are very close to 10,000 cases a year. At one time, we had nearly double that. Lower Merion courts have traditionally been the busiest in the county because we are a very densely populated township with lots of businesses, colleges, private schools, etc. Many cases and controversies arise, and we've always been very busy.
Now, these courts, the magisterial district courts, have been described as minor courts, they've been described as special courts, but many people refer to them as the People's Court. Why is that?
Well, the People's Court is an apt description. We are the court where individuals without lawyers can bring claims, resolve controversies, and hopefully get a final resolution of a case. We're absolutely necessary to avoid, frankly, people, what we call self-help, where people act on their own without the sanction of the law, to avoid violence among neighbors. Neighborhood disputes can be incredibly involved and long-standing, and it's very helpful to have an impartial arbiter hear those disputes and make some kind of a pronouncement.
So do you get involved in property line disputes or trees that fall over on a neighbor's property or disputes about the placement of a fence or a barking dog, that kind of thing?
Yes to all of those things, but I would emphasize we don't have the power generally to issue injunctions to tell people to move their fence. What can happen, though, is that people erect a fence on somebody else's property, for example, and the neighbor has it surveyed, determines it's on their property, has it removed, and sues for the cost of doing that. Sues for money. We have money jurisdiction in all of those matters, up to $12,000.
Okay. So if somebody has a grievance or a complaint, or they're involved in a controversy that they cannot work out, and I think that that's an important first step, because it's always best to try to work out disputes with your neighbors and with your fellow citizens. How do they go about coming to your court and having Judge Schireson rule on their controversy or their dispute?
Well, typically they would come to the counter of the district court. They would talk to one of the clerks there. They don't get to talk to me until they're in the courtroom. Tell them what their problem is and why they think they have a case. And if there's proper jurisdiction, if the venue is proper, the matter has to have taken place in my district or involve my district in a certain way. They can file a simple one-page civil complaint in which they state in plain language, not lawyer language. This isn't a pleading where they file detailed allegations. They simply state in plain language what rights they feel have been violated of theirs, and how much they feel they deserve if it's a money lawsuit. And I have to tell you, you can also, I don't want to encourage this, but that police typically are the ones who file criminal cases.
Okay.
But a citizen can file a criminal case. And if that is a serious criminal case, you need to go to the district attorney's office and get the approval of the district attorney. But if it's a summary case, a case where somebody has given you a bad check, a case where somebody may have harassed you or caused some other minor criminal offense, you can come to the court and file what's called a private criminal complaint, and the person will be summoned to court, and we'll have a trial on that basis.
I'm going to interrupt you for a minute because you said that you have to have jurisdiction, meaning it has to have arisen or it has to arise in your district. Would it be fair to say that for all of the citizens of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, there is a district and a magisterial district judge who can hear a controversy?
That's absolutely true, and in some cases, more than one can hear it. In civil cases, for instance, jurisdiction is proper if you can serve the defendant within my district. That is, if Steve Wigriser lives in my district and somebody has a civil grievance against him, they could serve him at his home, and jurisdiction would be proper, even though the wrong, if you will, the alleged wrong, took place somewhere else.
All right, so regardless of where somebody lives, they will have access to a court such as yours.
Absolutely.
And I will tell our viewers, for those who are watching from outside of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, most of the surrounding states have an equivalent kind of court. So that if you're involved in a controversy, if you're involved in a dispute, you need to have a speedy adjudication. Check your local directories. There's going to be a court near you that will do roughly the equivalent of what Judge Schireson does in his court. So you come in, your staff is well trained. They can assist people in filling out the required forms.
That is true.
They will get a trial date, and presumably the document will be served on whoever it is that they're making a claim against. I think a question that arises in many of our viewers is, do I need a lawyer? And while I'm not going to put you on the spot completely and get you to say yes or no, I'll ask you this. Is there a requirement that you have a lawyer?
Absolutely not required to have a lawyer.
Okay.
We're hesitant to tell people not to get counsel.
Right.
And in fact, my staff is instructed, I have 6 wonderful court clerks, they're instructed never to give legal advice. If people think they need a lawyer, we want them to consult one. But I can tell your viewers that in most cases, I don't think that lawyers make a decisive difference. I'm a judge who listens to the facts, applies the law, finds the facts, applies the law, and makes a determination. Lawyers make good arguments. Some of them don't. But many of them, good lawyers, can be helpful. But I can tell you the outcome is usually pretty much the same, whether there's a lawyer or not a lawyer. Now, let me caveat. If you're accused of a serious criminal offense, I would always advise to get an attorney. If you are facing a complex matter that you don't understand or you don't understand the law, I would certainly consult with a lawyer. But the simple fact is that because of the jurisdictional limit, because of the amounts involved, especially in civil cases, it isn't practical to pay a lawyer, in many cases, to assert a claim that's in the hundreds of dollars or even a couple of thousands of dollars.
So if people will take comfort in having legal advice, by all means, consult with an attorney. But to put it in direct street parlance, you can get justice in Judge Schereson's court with or without a lawyer. Is that a fair statement?
I would say that's a very fair statement.
Okay. Now, on the day of trial, what is it like in your courtroom, if you could just give us a very quick overview as to how that feels, because I have to tell you, whether it be for a traffic violation or a controversy with your neighbor, disputes are stressful to begin with. And, you know, most of us don't have legal background or training. We don't try cases for a living. What is it like in the courtroom?
Well, it starts in the waiting room, I'd say. You're going to see a lot of people out there. We schedule many cases. Obviously, cases have a specific time to be heard, and we try to adhere to that. We don't always meet that aspiration because we can't predict how long a case is going to take. But when you come into court, most people are a little nervous. They're going to see a lot of police around if it's a criminal case. They might see police even if they're there for a civil case because these cases overlap. They might see prisoners in a prisoner coming out of a prisoner holding area. But the vast majority of people who come before me are not prisoners, even if they're accused of criminal cases. They walk in, usually on bail. And in a typical traffic case, and I think that's really the most prolific of cases are the traffic cases. People are called in at the time of their case. Sometimes the police officers will talk to them in advance and ask them if they're interested in resolving the case. Some of these cases are capable of compromise. And some people are very insistent that they are not guilty and that they're wrongfully accused. And those people have hearings. And they come into the courtroom and they sit at a table, the same sort of a table that a lawyer would sit in a common pleas courtroom. The police sit at the other table. There usually is not an assistant district attorney prosecuting the case, especially a traffic case. And the police have the burden of proof beyond a reasonable doubt. And I start out by explaining to people what this system involves and the fact that they have no obligation to prove anything in a criminal, which includes traffic cases, case. The police have to first show that the event happened. They have to satisfy their burden of showing me that there is evidence that the crime was committed, that this is the person who committed the crime. There are technical requirements of proving certain traffic offenses, such as speeding, where speed timing devices are used, radar devices. And by the way, I have a great diversity of cases because not only do I have all the highways and byways of Gladwin and Villanova and Penn Valley and Bryn Mawr and places like that, I have the Schuylkill Expressway from City Avenue to Conshohocken and Route 476, the Blue Route, when it cuts through Lower Merion, and there are a lot of speeding cases that come from that. Those sorts of cases in particular have to be proved using documents showing the accuracy of the device, the approval of the proper speed timing device, if it's a radar device, and so forth. And cases can be won or lost on that basis alone. I don't advise most people to fight cases of speeding if they think they might have been speeding.
Right.
I tell friends this. If the officer is willing to talk about it, see if you can forge a compromise. Then you're not subjected to my decision, which might be one that you don't like.
Right.
You make your own deal, if you will.
Well, let's face it. I mean, most people who have contact with you, I presume, have contact with you in the context of a moving violation.
That is
and,
correct.
you know, I know you're cognizant of this, but I think it's worth repeating that entire process is very, very stressful for people. Starting with the very embarrassing and stressful moment when you get pulled over and the flashing lights and the police officer approaching your car. And then you get a ticket with a trial date. You got to take time off from work. You're worried about getting points. You're worried about whether your insurance premiums will be affected or you might be dropped entirely. Are you, as the judge, aware of all those considerations?
I am very sensitive to that. I like people, and I'm mindful that people who come before me for traffic offenses, with some exceptions, are great people. They're our neighbors. and may not be our neighbors. They're people who are entitled to respect. Maybe they've made a mistake. These are not criminals, and the police are aware of that. The police are people too, and I've learned to respect this about the police, that people who treat them respectfully, they get respect in return, generally speaking. And in traffic cases, they often get a very fair offer of compromise, one that takes into consideration that people don't want points on their driving record.
Right.
That it is points in general that cause insurance rates to increase. Driving records, frankly, only reflect convictions of offenses that carry points or license suspension. So non-point offenses, this is something that traffic lawyers know very well. And this is the aspiration, I'm giving the public a tip here, of traffic lawyers, is to get cases resolved on a non-point offense basis. If it's a speeding ticket, to have the speed lowered to a point where there are no points or less points to be imposed. That is a great virtue if that can happen.
So the takeaway from this is that if you feel that you absolutely did not do what you were charged with, then you should feel free and comfortable to come into your courtroom and present your defense.
Absolutely.
Right. But if you're stopped for speeding, or you're stopped for making an illegal turn, or something that is pretty clear, where you think there's a reasonable chance you're going to be found guilty, come into court and talk to the police officer and try to resolve the matter in a situation where points or an increase in your insurance premium is important to you. Now, I'm not looking to flood the court, obviously. If you are absolutely guilty as charged, you probably should just pay the ticket.
Well, I'm not going to agree with you there. I think there are people who feel they're guilty, but feel that their record is such in life, that their sense of responsibility, that everything else about them is such that a prosecutor, in this case a police officer, might see equities in their favor and give them some sort of a break. I think a very important point is you don't have to be not guilty to ask for something from the police. In fact, it's helpful to say to the police, look, I wasn't paying attention. Because that's honestly the truth with most people. They do something, they thought they stopped at a stop sign, they almost stopped. Don't tell the police officer the light was green when it was red. Then the officer is going to push back.
So it starts at the time of the initial stop.
Absolutely.
Treat the officer with respect. Realize that if you've been pulled over, it's not a battle that you're going to win right there on the spot.
Not on the street.
Yes.
No.
So treat the officer with respect. I've seen situations where officers have made notes about the conduct of the motorist, and that may or may not determine the kind of compromise that can be reached later on.
I think that's very true, and I think they take notes both with regard to the positive aspects of the stop and the negative aspects. Somebody who is insulting to the police at the stop, they want to remember that person when that person comes to court and asks for a break. Because the police are influential with me. If I think a person committed the offense and the police are dead set against compromising, I will sometimes work my will as a judge. If I think the equities are in favor of the defendant, it makes it much more difficult for me. I'm an impartial arbiter of these cases. I'm not part of the police team, and I'm not part of the defense team. And when people come before me sometimes and say, all I want is justice, most people really don't mean that. They don't want justice, because if they're guilty, they still don't want to be found guilty. Justice is finding guilty people guilty. And I go to great pains to make clear to people that I don't care who you are. I have a township full of celebrities, and I've seen them all. Your TV anchors, your sports heroes, the owners of professional teams, they all come into my court. And I could tell a lot of stories about that. They get tickets. They have controversies that come into court. I treat them no differently than I teach somebody who is a cleaning person, cleaning somebody's home, or somebody who works at a menial job and doesn't live in the township. To me, the highest calling The principle that I find most compelling as a judge to follow is equal justice under law.
I want to thank you for being here with us on The Leading Question, and I want to thank you, our viewers. I hope you enjoyed the show.